Swift Sages, I'm Prof. G, and in this lesson we're going to build our initial Predict app that mimics the classic Magic 8-Ball toy. And along the way, there'll be lots of big learning, including how to add custom images to an app, working with arrays of data, retrieving a random element, adding a simple animation, and multi-line text alignment. I predict that you will acquire skills. Let's get at it. So, Swifter, before we begin, we're going to have a challenge you can perform just to make sure that you've conquered the earlier app building skills that we've covered. You're going to create a new Xcode project named Predict. So this is going to be our 8-ball app, and it should look and work like the animation at the right. The image view should contain an image with the system name record.circle.fill, and we'll change that in a bit. That image view should be constrained to a box that's 350 by 350. Include a text view directly below this image. Use the font large title in the text view. Add a button at the very bottom. The title of the button should be Predict! And it should be in the font title too. Also note the button style, and the color used is indigo. Now when the app starts, the text view should appear empty. Store the text view string in a value named prediction. This will allow us to compare notes. And when predict is pressed, the text view should change to read, awesomeness is on its way. Now, one other thing I'd like you to fix is you can see when the app starts, there's an empty string in the text view. But when you click the predict button and text is placed in the text view, the image jumps up. Now, the reason for this is because when a text view contains an empty string, it has no height. But when you add text to a text view, it gains height. And that height added to the text view pushes the image up. Now, to fix this problem so the image doesn't jump around, I want you to add a frame modifier to the text view and give it a height of 120 points. When you do that, you should find the image is stationary in the same place, regardless of whether there is or is not an empty string in the text view. So this is your task, coder. I know you can do it. Pause, give it a shot, and when you're done, resume, and let's compare answers. Now let's create that Predict project. We'll open up Xcode, we'll create a new project. This is an app for iOS, those are the defaults. Click Next. The product name should be Predict. Defaults here should all be as is as well. You likely have your personal team already selected. Swift UI is the interface, Swift is language, no storage, no need to include tests. Click Next. I'll save mine to the desktop. Make sure Create Git Repository is clicked. Click Create. And our project is created. I'll double click on the title bar to expand to full screen, close the navigator's pane, shrink the preview pane, and we're ready to code. So let's first change that image. We don't want the globe in here. We want record.circle.fill as the system name. And I'll delete the two image modifiers that Xcode gives us and change those to .resizable and .scaled to fit. Then let's add a .font modifier underneath our text view, and we'll set the font to large title. Then below text view, we're going to add our button. Remember, as we start to type button, code completion gives us lots of options. We want the one with title key and action. Select that, press return. The title key should be the string predict! Then press tab to tab over to the action and press return, and that'll give us our trailing closure format. That's going to be the button action, and the button action is going to be where we change the string for our text view. But we haven't set up that string, so let's create a variable for that up top. Remember, we do that between the struct and the body variable, and that's going to be @state private var. We said to call this prediction. We'll set it equal to the empty string. Then I'll just copy the variable name prediction. I'm going to paste it over the literal string that's inside of the text view, and in the button action, I'm going to say prediction equals awesomeness is on its way. And let's jazz up that button as requested with .button style equals .bordered prominent, .tint should be .indigo, and .font should be .title too. Looking lovely, but we want that button on the bottom of the app screen, so we're going to put a spacer between the text view and the button view. And to push the image to the middle, we're going to put a spacer at the top of the VStack. Now the app starts, there's no text inside of our text view, but remember, when we have an empty string in a text view, the height of the text view is 0. But when we click on the Predict button, we get our text in there, awesomeness is on its way. However, the height of the text view expands to hold the text that we just added. That's why our image jumps up, and we don't want that. So as requested, let's add a frame modifier to our text view. We'll say dot, and we'll start to type FRA, and we only need the height in here. Now, I hadn't explicitly mentioned this, but if you leave the width parameter out, there won't be any width constraint. The width will expand automatically as needed, and the only constraint will be by the container. In this case, that's the VStack, which is the width of the app, minus padding. So there's no need to enter a width parameter, so just make sure that you've typed HE to add the height parameter as well. And I can see that the frame and the height are highlighted. In code completion, I'll press return, and I'll set my height to 120. Now we see, even though we've got an empty string in our text view, that text view has a fixed height of 120. When we click on predict, a string containing text goes inside the text view, but the text view height is constrained by the frame at 120. Nice! Now friends, we have an image that passes in a system name to use one of SwiftUI's built-in symbols. That's cool, those images are really useful, but sometimes we want to add our own images, and I'll show you how to do just that. And while we're at it, I'll also show you how we can add an app icon to our app. So I prepared a folder with some files in it that we can use in this project, and you can find that in an open Google Drive where I put all of the resources related to my course. So for now, I'm going to minimize Xcode by clicking on the amber traffic light. I'm going to open a browser, and I'm going to head to the URL bit.ly/prof-g-swiftui-files, all one word, all lowercase. Now you'll see lots of folders in here, but find the one Predict App Files. Right-click on it, select Download. Sometimes Google Drive is a bit slow when preparing the files for download. Now I have my browser configured to ask me where it wants to save this. I'm going to save mine to the desktop, but if your browser doesn't ask you where to save files, it's probably saved it to your Max Downloads folder. Now before we work with these files, let's double-click on the Predict App file folder in the Google Drive, and we see we've got 4 files in here. Predict Ball Image is what we're going to be using in our app. Predict Icon is the app's icon, and I've got 2 other Google Docs in here with some text that we can use in our app. If you double-click on this file named Magic 8-Ball Phrases, you'll see a bunch of strings in here separated by commas. These are the phrases that were in the original Magic 8-Ball toy. I just adapted these from phrases that I found in Wikipedia. Now I'll press the back button, and I'll double-click on Boost Ball Phrases. So if you want to mix it up a little bit, and instead of using this as a prediction ball, use it maybe to say nice things to give you an ego boost, here are a bunch of goofy phrases that I put in. You can feel free to modify these. So you can choose these. We'll worry about these later on. We're not going to use them yet. But let's click the left arrow on our browser, head to the Predict App Drive, and for now let's minimize the browser and let's find the folder we just downloaded. Now again, I saved mine to the desktop and I'm using Safari, so it automatically unzipped the file. Now remember, your browser may have downloaded this to your downloads folder, and if you're using Chrome or another browser, it might have downloaded a zip file that you need to double click to decompress, or Chrome might have given the folder a weird name, but the download that you want should be the latest file that was downloaded to your downloads folder. So once you get into that Predict App Files folder, you should see the 4 files that were downloaded from the Google Drive. So now I'm going to find Xcode back in the dock and expand it back to full screen, and I'll add the image file and the icon. Now to do that, we're going to go to a place in our project called the Assets Catalog. Now we can get there by clicking on the icon in the upper left corner of Xcode. That opens the Navigator's pane, and inside the Project Navigator, we should see an icon that says Assets. Click that. This brings up the Assets Catalog, and this is an area in our project where we can store app resources like custom colors, images, icons, sound files, and more. Now these resources will be listed in a pane just to the right of the Navigator's pane. And we see there's already an accent color defined in here by default, and there's an app icon. So click that item that says app icon, and inside we see a blank area where we can drag in an icon. It also says iOS 1024. Now all iOS app icons need to be 1024 by 1024 points. I've already created one of those for you, so let's head back to the Finder. I'm going to Command Tab to pull up the app switcher, and I'll switch to the Finder, and I'll get back into our Predict App folder, and I'm going to drag the Predict Icon PNG file into that icon space. So I'm going to click on that file and hold down my mouse. And while I'm holding down the mouse, I'm going to Command Tab to get back into Xcode, and I'm going to drag this file directly over that empty box. I'll release the mouse. The image drops in here, and I see my big app icon. It looks like a black billiard ball with a question mark in it. Nice. Now I'm also going to get an image that we're going to use in our app, so I'll Command Tab back over to the Finder. I'm going to click and drag the file that says Predict Ball Image. Now I'll drag this over into Xcode, and I'm going to drag it right into the pane that lists the resources that are in my Assets Catalog. I'll let go, and I should see the Predict Ball images in there. And now I can click on Content View to return to my code, and I can minimize the Navigator pane. So now let's replace this image with the image that we just added. Now in order to do that, we're going to need to change the image view code. You see the way we set up our image view right now, we have a parameter named system name in here. This is where we pass in a string, which is a valid system name for a symbol that's built into SwiftUI. Now, we don't want to use one of those built-in symbols, so we're not going to use this system name parameter when we set up our image. We need to write our image code a little bit differently. So I'm going to delete this image code, which is in here, and I'm going to retype image. And I have a bunch of options that show up. I want to select this one that says resource. So select it, press return. Notice there's no system name parameter in here, but this does want a string. And the string that I enter in here should have the exact same name as the image file that we added to our asset catalog. So strings go between double quotes, and if you remember the name of that file, you can type it in right now. That's great. But I always forget, so let me show you a couple of ways that we can pull that up. First, get back into the project navigator and click on the asset catalog. And here's a pro tip. If you click on any of the names in here and press return, you'll select the text in there. So I can press Command C to copy this name that I've highlighted. The one we want is predict-ball-image. And with this copied to the clipboard, I can click back on Content View, hide the navigator pane, paste this in between my double quotes, and look at that. I see the image showing up in my app. Nice! Now we can also use our library to set up our image view. So I'm going to press Command Z a few times to go back to the old system name that we had. Then I'm going to delete this line. I'm going to head up to the library. That's the plus icon in the upper right. And this time I'm going to click on the images library. So that's the fourth icon from the left. It looks like the icon that you often see for photo images. And when you click that, you see the one image that we'd added to our asset catalog. Double click that bad boy and Xcode will enter the image view code with the proper string inside. Niceness. Use whichever technique you'd like. Oh, and also in my instructions, I guess I'd forgot from earlier, we're supposed to constrain the image in a box that's 350 by 350. So I'll add another modifier below the image saying .frame. I'll also add WIHE so that it highlights the width and height parameters. Press return, and I'll enter 350 as both the width and the height. If you click predict, awesomeness is on its way. Let us continue the awesomeness. Now up next, we want to include a bunch of possible prediction choices in our app, and we want to choose a choice at random. Well, to store the different prediction choices, we're going to use a Swift data type called an array. Now, an array is an ordered list of data of the same type. So here we have an array called choices array, and inside the choices array variable are a bunch of strings. Now, I like to think of an array as being sort of like a big box, and inside that box are a bunch of smaller boxes, one box for each item in the list. Now, to create an array, we define it just like we do any variable with the var keyword, but we set that variable equal to, and we put in square brackets. And inside the square brackets, we put our list of data. So here I've defined a variable named choices array, and inside the square brackets are a bunch of strings separated by commas. It is certain, it is decidedly so, without a doubt, yes, definitely. These are the first four options for the original Magic 8-Ball. Now there are four strings in here, but to get to each of the individual strings, we have to refer to them by a number that starts counting at 0. So the first string is 0, second is 1, third is 2, and the fourth is 3. So if I want to get an individual number, I can refer to the name of the variable, choices array, followed with square brackets, and provide the number of the item that I want to reference, 0 through 3. So if I set the prediction variable equal to choices array in brackets 0, that would be the item at index 0, that's the string it is certain. And if I set prediction equal to choices array and in brackets 3, that would be the fourth element in the array because we count from 0, and that would be the string yes, definitely. Let's try this out in our code. So let's enter that array of data just below our prediction variable. And one more quick concept, we're going to be changing or varying the data inside prediction. Remember, each time we change the contents of the prediction variable, SwiftUI updates the user interface and shows that in our text view. That's why we used @state and defined this as a var or a variable. So the data inside prediction will vary. But when it comes to those prediction choices, the elements of the array, those are never going to change while the app is running. We're always going to have the same number of possible choices to choose from. This means the choices array doesn't need to be a variable since it won't change. So I'm going to define this not with @state and var, but instead I'm going to use the keyword let. Now by using let, I'm saying that this data is going to be a constant, it's immutable, it's never going to change. Now my code wouldn't break if I used @state and var to define the array, but it's considered better programming practice to use a let constant if your data is not going to change. So I'll follow the name let with the name of the constant that's going to hold data, that's going to be choices array, lower camel case, capital A, and I'll set this equal to, and since it's an array, my list of data is going to be between square brackets. The square bracket keys on the US keyboard are located on the same keys that have the curly braces. So I'll write our first element of the array. In between quotes, I'll say it is certain, then a comma after the closing double quote. And you can put array items on the same line, but I like to put them on different lines, and I'll show you how we'll format this in a minute. So I'm going to press return, then I'll add the string, it is decidedly so, put the comma after the closing double quote, the string without a doubt, again, list separating comma outside the double quotes, and then on the last line, yes, comma, definitely. You don't need a comma at the very end, but again, make sure that you've closed this with a closing square bracket. Now to reformat this, I'm going to highlight all of the text in my array, and I'm going to type Control-I. In a previous lesson, we learned the pro tip that Control-I will reformat the indentation. This looks good, very readable. Now, if you want to try out your array, down in our text view, we can replace prediction with, how about choices array, and in between square brackets, the index value 1, we see it says decidedly so. Now arrays are 0 indexed, we start counting at 0, so 1 is the second element, it is decidedly so. Change the index to 0, it is certain. Change the index to 3, yes, definitely. Nice. But we want to use the variable in our text view, so let's replace the choices array with prediction. And now down here in our button action, we could use any of the elements in choices array when we click on the button. For example, we could set prediction equal to choices array bracket to bracket. Click the predict button and it says without a doubt. Now that's neat, but what we really want to do is we want to get a random value from the array. Well, Swift provides a way for us to do that. It's called the random element method. The Swift language has certain functions that are accessible to any values of a particular data type. We can access these values using what's called dot notation, and the functions apply to the data type that they're attached to. Now these special attached functions in Swift are called methods, and here's how this works. So let's delete the bracket index value, and directly after choices array, no space, type a dot. And oh, we see a ton of different options show up. This is dot notation. These values with M's are methods. They're little functions that can be applied to our data. In a future lesson, we'll learn more about arrays and more about the methods that we can use on arrays. But if we want to get the random value for an array, we can start typing the word random, and look at that. There's a method called random element. Code completion says this returns a random element of a collection. An array is a collection of data, so this applies to our array. And there's one more tricky thing about this. It's one of the trickier things in Swift. I'll describe this now, but no, we're going to cover it more in a future lesson. Note that the random element is followed by an arrow with the word string and a question mark. Now, arrow returning string is cool. We should return a single string if we try to get a random element from an array of strings. But what's up with this question mark? Well, let's press return here and I'll describe this. Initially, this looks like it's going to work, but dang, Xcode gives us an error. Now, if I click on the error ball and scroll up, Xcode does a better job here of giving us some fixes. The primary error message says string question mark must be unwrapped to string. Now, this is Swift's way of being very specific about the possibilities that could happen with our random element method. Swift is super specific about the data types that can be used. Normally, you'd think, hey, if I want a random element of a string array, it should always be a string, right? Well, actually, there is the possibility that you try to get a random element of an array with no values. Now, even though we're using a constant here and we can't remove any elements of an array, you could have an array of variables. Imagine a list of contacts, and if you deleted all of your contacts, well, you would have an array with no elements. Now, if you try to use random element on an array with no elements, it can't give you back a string. It will give you back nothing. That's called nil in Swift. So when we saw string question mark in there, that's Swift's way of saying, hey, I might give you back a string, or I might give you back nil. Now, I don't want to overload you with new terms early on, but Swift refers to values that can be nil or that can hold legitimate values as optionals. And optionals are written with question marks after them. So, for example, when you see string question mark, that just means that this might return a string, or it might return nothing, it might return nil. And Swift requires you to acknowledge the fact that you might get nothing. Now, programmers that work with other programming languages might think Swift is being super fussy, but Apple actually designed Swift to require developers to think through all the options that could occur. And by dealing with this actually makes your Swift programs less error-prone than code written in other programming languages. Swift actually forces developers to write better code. Now, again, if this seems too much for you, don't worry about it. We're going to cover it a lot more in a future lesson. Just know that we need to do something to deal with the fact that it might be possible that we say get a random element and there aren't any elements in an array. Now here's the thing. We are the programmers of this app. We know that we defined the array, we know it's a constant so we can't remove elements of that array, and we know we've got at least one element in there. So one option we can use is this second fix that we see down here that says force unwrap using an exclamation point. Let's click on fix. Swift adds the exclamation point, the error goes away, and our code will work. Click predict, and oh, we get a random element. And yours is likely different from mine, but if you click again, you get another value. And if you click enough times, sometimes you'll get the random element repeated, but the same kind of thing could occur with a magic 8-ball. Sometimes you shake it up and it gives you the same answer twice in a row. So this is very cool. Now I do want to show you that other fix option. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the exclamation point. The errors show up again, and I'm going to click on the red ball, and I'm going to see those two fixes. Now, the one thing that's potentially bad about using that exclamation point, Swift calls that force unwrapping, is that if for some reason, and it's impossible in the way that we wrote this code, but if for some reason the array had 0 elements in it, and we said give us back a string, the exclamation point would assume we're getting back a string when instead we got nil, and the code would crash. Now, we see this other option here. It's the first fix, and this says coalesce using double question marks to provide a default value when the optional value is nil. So let's click this fix button, and Xcode enters a double question mark after random element, and then it puts in a placeholder that says default value. So the 2 question marks in Swift are called the nil coalescing operator, which sounds super geeky, but it just means if what you get back from this function is not a nil, use what's on the left-hand side of the double question marks. But if this function does give you a nil, use the default value on the right of the double question marks. So we have to enter a default value in case we get nil, even though the way we wrote our code, that's impossible. And I'll just enter the string empty array. Some developers will think that this is a better option because if somebody modifies your code, they turn our array into a variable, and they make it possible to eliminate all of the values that exist in an array. If we have a default value in here, if we get back nil because we've got an empty array, our code will never crash. Again, don't worry about fully understanding this business with nils and stuff. In a future lesson, we're going to describe this in depth, and we'll give you lots of examples so you can try things out on your own and hopefully really understand what's going on. But for now, know what we just wrote works. Now we just have 4 elements in our array, and this is pretty cool, but let's get all of those possible magic 8-ball phrases and put them in our choices array. Let's head over to the top of our code and delete everything between the square brackets and choices array. Now this is an array with no values in it, but remember I created a doc with all of the strings for the magic 8-ball toy. We can find that by heading back to our browser, and in our predict app files Google folder, open up this magic 8-ball phrases document. I'm going to highlight all of these strings and I'm going to copy them with a Command C, head back to Xcode, and in between the square brackets, I'm going to Command V to paste this in. The formatting looks good. I'm just going to do 1 backspace here so that the closing square bracket is right after the last element in the array. And let's click predict. And you, sagacious sorcerer of Swift, look at those random values you have showing up in your app. Outstanding. Now this lesson is getting a bit long, but there are a couple of things that we can do to polish up this version of the app. First, let's add an animation modifier so that our text fades in sort of like the real magic 8-ball. Now to do this, we'll add a new modifier for the text view and type in .animate and select this one here with the animation and value parameters. And Xcode says this applies the given animation to all animatable values within the body closure. Again, very geeky, but know that Swift UI animations are very powerful, and you guessed it, we're going to cover more on animations in a future lecture, but for now, let's press return and I'll describe what this does. Now the first value in here has .easeIn highlighted. Instead of this, why don't we replace this with .default? Now that'll give us a nice fade in effect, and we want this to happen whenever our prediction value changes. So we'll tab over to value, and in here we'll enter prediction. Again, this means whenever prediction changes, we'll provide that cool fade animation. Let's try it out by clicking the predict button. And ultra slick, look at that fancy fade in. Your app is looking legit. Now, one last thing I'll show you involves the alignment of the text in the text view. There's one element in our array that is so large that it's spread across 2 lines. It's this one here, concentrate and ask again. So I'm actually going to copy this, and I'm going to remove the prediction variable from our text view just temporarily, and I'm going to paste in this string just so that we can see what the 2-line text looks like, and we see it's left justified. Now, what's actually happening is left justification is the default, and all of the text text that's showing up in here is left justified. But the way that Swift UI works is the text view only expands to take up as much horizontal space as is required to show the text, and the VStack is actually centering that smaller text view in the vertical stack. So the other phrases look like they're being centered in the text view. They're not. They're being left justified, but the text values are really small, and the VStack is centering them. Now we can fix this quirk by center aligning our text. And the way that we'll do this is we'll add another modifier. So I want to put this just below the font modifier. And what's nice is if you forget what a modifier name is, but you know it refers to alignment, you can just type in .alignment. You see Xcode presents you with all the options that have alignment in it. And oh yeah, there's this one down here called multi-line text alignment. If I highlight that, Xcode says, sets the alignment of the text view that contains multiple lines of text. That's what we want to do. It accepts an alignment parameter, press return. Now the alignment parameter that's included here by default is .leading. That means left justification. .trailing means right justification, but we want to center things. If we type in a dot, we can see, oh yeah, there's a dot center in here. Choose that. This fixes the issue. Our largest phrase is now center aligned, as are all of them, but this only shows up if we have text that's on more than one line. So I'm going to replace the string in our text view back with the prediction variable. And Swifter, try this out. Look at how miraculous this is. Call your friends and family over to see your app. You've developed something that's super cool. That's it for this lesson, but as always, big learning was afoot. We covered adding images to our view. We worked with frames in a text view. We learned about arrays, the random element array method. We learned how to deal with the possibility of nil, either through the exclamation point or by the double question mark of nil coalescing, which required us to add a default value. We added an animation, and we used the multi-line text alignment modifier. Swift Scholar, you have built the Predict app, but I have a prediction for you. The big learning will continue. We'll polish this up a bit more in our next lesson. Until then, continue to hack.